Okay, so you're here, right? You're listening because you're like us, always trying to get ahead of the curve. Figure out what's going to be big in the future.
Right.
Especially in blockchain.
Yeah. Blockchain's changing so fast, it's hard to keep up.
It really is. And there's this name we keep hearing everywhere lately. Monad, have you heard of this?
I have, yeah. It seems like it's all over the place. Monad. It's a new Layer 1 blockchain, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's what we're going to try to figure out today. What is Monad? What makes it different from everything else out there? And why should anyone even care?
A big question, right? What's the point?
Exactly. And we've got a pretty good set of materials to dig through today.
Yeah, we do.
We've got some stuff from Monad's ecosystem directory. We've got this really interesting Substack post by Keone.
Always insightful.
Yes, and of course we got to go to the source. So we've got some stuff from Monad's own website.
Sounds good. Let's jump in.
So I guess the first thing is what is Monad trying to be? What's the big idea?
Well, Keone, in his Substack post, he calls it and I'm quoting here, fundamentally optimized EVM blockchain.
Okay, fundamentally optimized. That sounds like a pretty bold claim.
Yeah, no kidding. And when you go to Monad's website, they actually lay out some really aggressive targets for what they think they can achieve. In terms of performance, they're talking about potentially 10,000 transactions per second.
Wow.
Near zero gas fees.
Okay, that's getting everyone's attention.
Yeah. And get this, 1 second block times with something they call single slot finality.
All right, break that down for me. What does all that mean?
So basically they're saying they can process transactions incredibly fast, make it super cheap to use the network, and confirm those transactions almost instantly.
That's a lot to promise.
It is. But here's the thing that I find most interesting about Monad. They're claiming to do all this without sacrificing full EVM compatibility.
Okay, now EVM compatibility, that's a big deal. For people who maybe aren't deep in the blockchain world, can you just explain what that means and why it matters?
Sure. So EVM stands for Ethereum Virtual Machine. It's basically the engine that runs the Ethereum network and executes smart contracts. Now, EVM compatibility means that Monad can run the same smart contracts that were designed for Ethereum.
Got it. So it's like speaking the same language, right?
Exactly. So for developers, this is huge. It means they can take their existing applications, the libraries, the smart contracts they've already written in Solidity, which is the main programming language for Ethereum, and they can just deploy them on Monad. No need to start from scratch.
So you're saying, if you're a developer and you've been building on Ethereum, you can basically just pick up your stuff and move it over to Monad.
Pretty much. And that's a massive advantage, right? It saves time, it saves resources, and it means that Monad could potentially tap into this massive existing ecosystem of Ethereum applications and the developers who built them.
Yeah, it's like if everyone's speaking the same language, it's much easier to collaborate and build things together.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what makes Monad so interesting. They're trying to offer the best of both worlds. This really high level of performance with those fast transaction speeds and low fees, and the familiarity and interoperability of the EVM.
Okay, that's all very impressive, but the question is, how are they actually doing it? What's the secret sauce, the tech behind all these claims?
So they've got a few key innovations they talk about on their website. One of the biggest is something called optimistic parallel execution.
Optimistic parallel execution. All right, I'm going to need you to break that down for me.
Sure. So traditionally, blockchains process transactions one after another, right?
Yep.
Like a single line at the bank. But Monad tries to do things differently. They want to execute multiple transactions at the same time in parallel.
Okay, so it's like having multiple tellers at the bank instead of just one.
Exactly. And that's where the optimistic part comes in. They execute these transactions in parallel, but then they go back and check the results against the current state of the blockchain to make sure everything's still accurate.
So they're kind of assuming everything will work out, but they've got a system to catch any errors.
Right. If they find any conflicts or errors, they re-execute those transactions to make sure everything is consistent and that the original order of transactions is preserved.
Clever. So that's how they're trying to get that speed boost. What else is contributing to Monad's performance?
Another big factor is their custom database, MonadDB. This is a database that's specifically designed for the EVM.
Okay, so why is that such a big deal? Why not just use an existing database?
Well, most blockchains store a lot of data in RAM, which can be expensive and limit how decentralized the network can be.
Because not everyone can afford to have tons and tons of RAM, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But MonadDB is designed to store most of the blockchain's data on SSDs, which are much cheaper and more widely available.
So it's about making it more affordable for people to run a node, which is essential for decentralization.
Precisely. If more people can run nodes, the network becomes more resilient and less susceptible to any single point of failure.
Makes sense. Anything else we should know about the tech behind Monad?
Yeah, they also use something called asynchronous execution, which basically means separating the process of executing transactions from the process of reaching consensus on those transactions.
So it's like dividing the labor, doing things simultaneously to speed things up.
Yeah, exactly. And then they have their high-performance POS consensus mechanism, which is what allows them to achieve those incredibly fast block times and that single slot finality we were talking about earlier.
Remind me, what's single slot finality again?
It basically means that once a block is added to the blockchain, it's considered final and irreversible, much faster than on other blockchains.
So it's like, boom, done, confirmed, no going back.
Right. It eliminates a lot of the uncertainty and potential for things to change after the fact.
So it's a combination of all these things working together, the parallel execution, the special database, the asynchronous execution, and the fast POS system.
Yeah, it's a pretty sophisticated approach to scaling a blockchain. They've clearly put a lot of thought into this.
Okay, so we've talked about the technology, but a blockchain is only as good as the applications that are built on it, right? Let's take a look at this Monad ecosystem directory you mentioned. There are like over 200 projects listed here.
Yeah, it's really impressive, actually. It shows that there's a lot of excitement and development activity happening around Monad.
So the directory breaks things down into apps and infrastructure. Can you just give us a quick overview of what kinds of things are being built here?
Sure. So in the apps category, we're seeing a lot of DeFi projects, which is pretty typical for any new layer one. There's also a good chunk of projects focused on DePIN, which stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks.
DePIN. Interesting.
Yeah, that's an area that's getting a lot of attention lately. There are also gaming projects, NFTs, and even some listed under AI, which is pretty cool.
AI on the blockchain, that's definitely a trend we're seeing more of.
It is, for sure. And on the infrastructure side, there's a whole range of essential tools and services. There's stuff for account abstraction, analytics, cross-chain solutions, developer tooling, identity services, oracles, wallets, privacy, zero-knowledge tech, pretty much everything you need to build a robust ecosystem.
That's quite a list. Can you highlight a few specific projects that caught your eye just to give us a sense of what's being built here?
Okay, in DeFi, there's AUSD, which is a stable coin. There's AZX, which they describe as an A to Z DeFi hub offering leveraged trading. There's Amalgam, which is doing something interesting with combining lending and trading. And then there's Backpack Wallet, which is already pretty popular on Solana, but they're also building on Monad.
I'm seeing a lot of these DeFi projects focus on trading.
You are. It seems like Monad's speed and low fees are particularly attractive for more sophisticated financial applications. And for infrastructure, there are big names like Alchemy and BlockVision, which provide a lot of the behind-the-scenes tools that developers rely on. All Domains is focused on Web3 identity, which is increasingly important in this space.
Okay, what about the AI stuff? What kind of projects are we seeing there?
There's Acraft.fun, which is a decentralized AI agent launch board. There's also BlazPay AI, which wants to make crypto easier to use, and Atlantis, which is a modular decentralized exchange that mentions DeFi. So combining DeFi and AI.
It seems like AI is making its way into almost every corner of the blockchain space.
It really is. And in gaming, there's Anris, a game where you collect and train creatures, and DRKVRS, a multiplayer action RPG, also leveraging AI.
Interesting. And I noticed a lot of these projects are marked as coming soon.
Yeah, which is a good sign, I think. It means that the ecosystem is still very much under development.
It's like the potential is there, but it's still early days.
Exactly. And then there's some projects that are specifically highlighted as only on Monad, which suggests that they're taking advantage of some of Monad's unique features or capabilities.
Okay, so beyond just the projects themselves, how is Monad supporting these builders? What kind of community are they fostering?
Well, on their website, they have a whole section called Monad Builders that outlines a lot of their initiatives. One that stands out is Monad Madness.
Monad Madness. Sounds intense.
It is. It's a global pitch competition, and they're offering $1 million in prizes, plus the potential for $60 million in VC funding.
Wow, that's serious money.
Yeah, they're really putting their money where their mouth is, which is a good sign. And they're also running EVM-Macathon hackathons, which are specifically designed to help developers build on Monad.
So they're providing resources, mentorship, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then they have their Mock Accelerator program, which is designed to help new blockchain startups get off the ground.
So they're really trying to nurture this ecosystem from all angles.
They are. And they're emphasizing the importance of community. They want to build a global community around Monad.
All right, before we wrap up, let's address a few key questions that I think people might have about Monad. They have a pretty comprehensive FAQ section on their website. First one, is Monad truly 100% EVM compatible? No code changes needed.
That's what they say. They claim it's 100% compatible at the bytecode level, which means that smart contracts that work on Ethereum should work on Monad without any modifications.
Okay, so that's a big plus for developers who are already familiar with Ethereum. Another question they address is about their database, MonadDB. What makes it so special?
Well, they call it the first database that's purpose-built for the EVM. And they argue that this is important because the EVM uses a specific way of organizing data that's not ideal for traditional databases.
So they're saying that MonadDB is optimized for the way the EVM works.
Exactly. It allows for parallel access to data, which is a big part of how they achieve their performance goals.
Got it. One last question. Why did they decide to build Monad as a layer 1 blockchain rather than as a layer 2 on top of something like Ethereum?
Good question. They say it's about offering developers a complete solution with full composability and censorship resistance baked in at the base layer.
So they're not trying to just improve on Ethereum, they're trying to build something entirely new.
Yeah, it's a different approach.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. What are the key takeaways here?
Well, we've learned that Monad is a new high-performance layer 1 blockchain that's trying to achieve significantly faster speeds and lower costs than existing blockchains, while still maintaining full compatibility with the EVM.
Right, and they're doing this through a combination of some really innovative technologies, like their optimistic parallel execution engine and their custom-built database.
Exactly. And they're also putting a lot of effort into building a strong ecosystem with lots of interesting projects in development.
So for you, the listener, this means there's a new player in the blockchain space that's making some big promises and attracting a lot of attention. It's definitely something worth watching.
It is. And it raises some interesting questions like, what could the long-term impact of Monad be on the broader blockchain landscape?
Yeah, what happens if they actually deliver on all these promises?
Exactly. What new types of applications might become possible? Which of these developing projects will be the most successful?
So much to think about.
There is.
Well, thanks for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating project.
It really is. All right, that's it for our deep dive on Monad. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to all the sources we discussed today. Until next time.
See you then.